My stepmother hates me and does everything possible to destroy my relationship with my father so she can give birth to his heir. When Alia turned 13, she was already learning what it meant to navigate life in a blended family. Her mother had passed away when she was just a little girl, and a few years later her father, Michael, met Marina. Marina was younger, with lively eyes and an energy that seemed boundless. She was nothing like Alia's biological mother, yet she had this warmth about her that made it surprisingly easy for Alia to welcome her into their lives. Over time, Marina became a comforting presence and a source of joy. Although it felt strange at first, Alia started to call her Mom. The relationship between Marina and Michael seemed solid, built on respect and shared laughter. They went on family trips, had dinners together every night, and spent countless evenings watching movies side by side. For Alia, this new life felt peaceful and full. After years of it being just her and her dad, she finally felt like their family was complete. Marina's role soon grew beyond that of just a stepmom. She became someone Alia could confide in, someone who'd listen to her teenage dreams and worries. Life felt good, almost ideal, and Alia found herself daring to believe things might stay this way. That is, until one night at dinner, when Marina announced she was pregnant. Michael looked thrilled, practically beaming, and Marina's face glowed with a mix of excitement and nervousness. But for Alia, the news stirred something else. She felt an unexpected twist of emotion, struggling to process how this new addition would change things. Just when she had finally accepted Marina into her life as a stepmother, a baby was now going to add an entirely new dynamic. At first, Alia tried to convince herself to feel excited, telling herself that a younger sibling could be fun, someone to share memories with as they both grew. But as Marina's pregnancy advanced, Alia noticed subtle changes. Little things at first, Marina spending more time preparing for the baby and less time asking about Alia's day. Then there were bigger changes, like Marina's warm encouragement turning into what felt like polite but distant smiles. Marina seemed more distracted, and at times even short-tempered. She'd snap at Alia over small things that had never been an issue before. Slowly, Alia sensed a growing distance. One evening, Marina pulled her aside and said, "Listen, honey, with the baby coming, we're all going to have to make a few adjustments. You're getting older, and it's time you start helping out more around the house." Alia nodded, though she didn't fully understand Marina's tension. She'd always done her share of chores, but now it felt like she was being pushed into a role she hadn't chosen. Meanwhile, Michael seemed oblivious to the tension creeping into the household. He was fully caught up in the excitement of fatherhood again, doting on Marina like Alia had never seen before. And sometimes, Marina would use this to her advantage, subtly implying that Alia wasn't adjusting well or was acting out. Michael, eager to support his pregnant wife, often sided with Marina, leaving Alia feeling increasingly isolated and misunderstood. Alia felt trapped, isolated within her own home, as the relationship with Marina grew colder by the day. But then, everything took an unexpected, gut-wrenching turn. One afternoon, while Michael was at work, Alia happened to overhear Marina on a hushed phone call. Her voice was tense, words laced with urgency. "No, I haven't told him," Marina hissed, her voice barely audible through the closed door. "I can't risk it. Not now." A pause followed, then, "Yes, I know he thinks it's his, but he can't find out. Do you understand?" Alia stood frozen, her mind racing as she pieced together what she'd just overheard. Was Marina suggesting that the baby wasn't her dad's? The thought horrified her, yet she was paralyzed by a whirl of fear and disbelief. Should she confront Marina? Tell her father? But what if she'd misunderstood everything? In the days that followed, Alia couldn't shake her gnawing suspicion. She began to observe Marina even more closely, noticing how tense she seemed whenever Michael mentioned the baby or talked about their family's future. And as if adding fuel to Alia's unease, Marina became stricter and more controlling, reprimanding her over the smallest slip-ups and piling on new rules around the house. The warmth that had once defined Marina seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, almost unfamiliar stranger. Desperate to make sense of everything, Alia tried bringing up her worries to her dad. She told him how distant and harsh Marina had become, how completely different she'd seemed since the pregnancy. But Michael, blinded by the excitement of the new baby, brushed off her concerns, chalking it up to teenage moodiness and suggesting that Alia just needed time to adjust. Talking to him felt like screaming into a void, and with every dismissed concern, Alia felt herself pulled further into isolation. Then one day, Marina left for a doctor's appointment, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked. Alia's heart hammered as she glanced at it, debating whether to look. She'd never been one to invade someone's privacy, but her doubts gnawed at her, refusing to let her rest. Unable to resist, she finally picked up the phone and scrolled through Marina's messages. What she found turned her world upside down. Marina had been texting a man named Jason, a name Alia had never heard before. Their messages were packed with references to the baby, with Marina constantly reassuring Jason that everything would be fine, and that Michael doesn't suspect anything. In an instant, any trust Alia had in Marina was shattered. For days, Alia wrestled with the secret, feeling crushed under the weight of what she knew. Part of her wanted to confront Marina, to demand the truth outright. But the other part, terrified of the fallout, worried about what this revelation would do to her father. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, suffocating her, until she finally reached her breaking point. It happened at a family dinner, with Michael cheerfully discussing plans for the baby's future, blissfully unaware of the storm about to hit. With all the ups and downs lately, Marina had become short-tempered and easily irritated, snapping at things that hadn't bothered her before. It all started with small criticisms. One evening, as Alia was setting the dinner table, she accidentally placed a plate a bit off-center. Suddenly, Marina's voice pierced the air. "Can't you even put a plate down properly? It's not that hard." Alia, taken aback, mumbled an apology, but the tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Marina's mood swings only seemed to get wilder. She would go from calm to furious over the tiniest things. A smudge on the kitchen counter, a slightly wrinkled shirt, or even Alia's habit of leaving her books scattered on the coffee table. Alia felt like she was walking on eggshells, never knowing when Marina would erupt. Their dad, Petro, was caught in the middle. He seemed completely unaware of the brewing storm, attributing Marina's behavior to pregnancy hormones. Whenever Alia tried to bring it up, he would wave her off, insisting that she just needed to be patient. "You have to understand, honey," he'd say with a forced smile. "Pregnancy is tough on Marina. She really needs our support right now." But it wasn't just Marina's temper that had changed. Her whole attitude toward Alia felt different, too. Where she used to take the time to listen to Alia's thoughts and dreams, now every attempt at conversation felt forced. Marina seemed completely uninterested, often brushing off Alia's words with a distracted nod or a vague, "That's nice." It stung, but Alia stayed quiet, terrified of provoking another outburst. One Saturday morning, while Alia was in her room doing homework, she heard Marina's sharp voice calling from downstairs. "Alia, come here now." Her stomach twisted with anxiety as she hurried down to find Marina glaring at a spilled cup of coffee on the counter. "Why didn't you clean this up?" she demanded, her eyes narrowed. "I didn't see it," Alia stammered, surprised. She hadn't even been in the kitchen that morning. But Marina's face twisted with frustration. "Always an excuse, isn't there?" she sneered. "You think this house runs itself? Maybe it's time you started acting like a responsible member of this family instead of a lazy child." Alia's heart sank, but she kept her gaze down, muttering, "I'm sorry." She felt powerless against Marina's escalating aggression. When Petro walked in and saw the exchange, he just sighed, as if he too were disappointed in her. The pattern continued, with Marina's criticisms ramping up to full-blown accusations. She began blaming Alia for everything that went wrong around the house, no matter how unrelated. If a grocery item was missing, it was because Alia hadn't helped with the shopping list. If laundry was delayed, it was like Alia was the one neglecting her responsibilities. Alia felt like she was constantly failing. The weight of Marina's endless disapproval hung over her, pressing down harder each day. The stress was creeping into every corner of her life in ways she couldn't fully grasp. She became more withdrawn, retreating to her room at any opportunity to avoid interactions that might set Marina off. Even school, which had once been her escape, felt tainted by the exhaustion she carried from home. Her grades began to slip, and she struggled to focus in class. Teachers who had once praised her diligence started pulling her aside, asking if everything was okay. Alia would force a smile and say, "I'm fine," but even she could hear the hollowness in her own words. One afternoon, Marina planned a family outing to a nearby park, claiming she wanted to spend some quality time together. Alia's heart lifted a little at the idea, hoping it might help mend the cracks in their relationship. But as they walked through the park, Marina's tone turned sharp again, especially when Petro stepped away to take a phone call. Turning to Alia, Marina's expression turned icy. "Do you even care about this family?" she hissed. "It's like you're just here, doing the bare minimum. You're selfish, Alia. All you think about is yourself." Alia was taken aback and tried to defend herself. "I do care, Marina. I really do try to help." But Marina just laughed bitterly. "Help? All you do is mope around and act like a victim. This isn't a fairy tale, Alia. You're not the center of the universe." Petro returned just as Marina's voice escalated, and Alia looked to him, hoping he'd step in. Instead, he placed a hand on Marina's shoulder, murmuring, "Let's keep it calm. Okay?" But his words felt half-hearted, and to Alia's dismay, he didn't challenge Marina's accusations. It was as if he couldn't see the toll this was taking on her. She felt abandoned, like a stranger in her own family, unsupported and invisible. As Marina's due date approached, her behavior became even more erratic. She developed an obsession with cleanliness, scrutinizing Alia's chores and picking apart even the smallest mistakes. Whether it was the way Alia folded towels or washed dishes, nothing was ever good enough. One evening, after hours of scrubbing the kitchen to meet Marina's impossible standards, Alia collapsed onto her bed, utterly exhausted. She wondered how much longer she could endure this endless cycle of accusations and disappointments. In her mind, she thought of her mother, the warmth and gentleness that felt like a comforting embrace in her memories. A pang of longing hit her as she wished for someone who could truly understand the turmoil she was trapped in. But that solace felt like a distant dream. Things finally reached a breaking point one evening when Things spiraled into chaos when Marina accused Alia of something far more serious. Her precious necklace had vanished. Without a second thought, she pointed a finger at Alia. "It's always you, isn't it?" she seethed. "Everything was fine before you started acting up. Where did you hide it?" Alia's heart raced, a wave of disbelief washing over her. "I didn't touch it. I swear," she pleaded, desperation lacing her voice. But Marina was relentless, storming into Alia's room, tearing through drawers, and flinging belongings aside as if she were hunting for evidence of a crime. When Petro walked in, his confused expression felt like a betrayal. He stood by in silence, giving a tacit approval to Marina's irrational tirade. Alia felt the humiliation sear through her. How could her stepmother treat her like a common thief in her own home? When the necklace finally turned up in Marina's room the next day, she dismissed it with a casual wave. "Oh, I just forgot I moved it," she said, as if that could undo the damage. But for Alia, something inside her cracked. The trust she once had in her family shattered, leaving behind a deep, echoing void where safety and love used to be. Just days later, the tension escalated again. Marina, visibly on edge, turned her fury toward Alia, accusing her of distracting Petro from his responsibilities. "Every time I need his help, he's running after you, dealing with your problems," she spat, venom dripping from her words. "Do you even understand the stress you're causing?" Petro stood nearby, torn but silent, his inaction feeling like a knife to Alia's heart. His lack of support felt like a betrayal, confirming that he sided with Marina's harsh, twisted view. Alia felt suffocated, trapped in a house where her very existence was met with hostility, where her emotions were unwelcome. Despite the suffocating atmosphere, Alia clung to a flicker of hope that her father might finally recognize the toll Marina's behavior was taking on her. But every time she attempted to reach out, Petro deflected, insisting that Marina needed their unwavering support. "She's been through so much," he'd say, his voice heavy with weariness. "You need to be patient, Alia." Yet, with each passing day, Alia's patience frayed, unraveling like a worn thread. She watched her father bend over backward for Marina, sacrificing his time and energy, oblivious to the silent suffering of his daughter. Alia's thoughts spiraled into darkness as she wondered how much longer she could remain silent, how much more she could bear before she finally shattered. The arrival of the baby was meant to bring joy and unity, but it had instead opened a chasm between them, one that felt impossible to bridge. Alia was haunted by the fear that she was losing her family, her home, and perhaps even herself in the process. The tension in the household hit a breaking point one late autumn evening. The air was thick and electric, charged with an energy that felt ready to explode. Marina, heavily pregnant and teetering on the edge of volatility, became a storm, her fury brewing like a tempest. Frustration erupted in every interaction between Marina and Alia, transforming their home into a pressure cooker of tension. It felt like any small action Alia took was a trigger for Marina's explosive anger. Placing a glass too close to the edge of the table or leaving her shoes by the door for just a moment could set Marina off. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now resembled a war zone. Alia sensed the chasm between them widening with each passing day, but she was helpless, unsure of how to bridge it. She did her best to keep her distance, retreating to her room or escaping to the outside world to evade Marina's relentless scrutiny. Yet, no matter where she turned, she couldn't escape the weight of Marina's accusations. One fateful day in the kitchen, the tension reached a boiling point. Marina's eyes narrowed as she spotted a tiny puddle of water by the sink, and she exploded. "Are you trying to make me slip?" she hissed, a wild paranoia flashing in her eyes. "Or do you just have no respect for the people who do all the work around here?" Alia felt her heart race, a mixture of disbelief and anger rising within her. "I'll clean it up," she managed to say, grabbing a paper towel, but Marina was relentless. "It's the little things, Alia, the way you leave your mess for others to deal with. It's selfish. Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" Just then, Petro walked in, his face twisted in mild discomfort at the scene unfolding before him. Instead of stepping in to defend Alia, he rubbed Marina's back, murmuring, "She didn't mean it, sweetheart. Let's just keep things calm." The heat of Marina's irritation radiated off her as she shot Alia a glare that could cut glass. "You have no idea what I'm going through, Petro. She's constantly pushing my limits, testing me. I'm carrying our child, and she's making this as difficult as possible." Alia's heart shattered at her father's lack of response. How could he not see the damage this was doing? His unwavering loyalty to Marina felt like a dagger to her heart, eclipsing the bond they once shared. The next day, the situation escalated further. Alia sat on the couch, desperately trying to immerse herself in a book, hoping to drown out the suffocating atmosphere that surrounded her. But Marina stormed in, a tempest of fury. "What are you doing just sitting there? There's a mountain of work to be done. How can you be so lazy while everyone else is working?" Alia looked up, her mind racing. "I didn't know you needed help. I thought you were resting," she replied, confusion giving way to frustration. Marina's face twisted in rage. "Don't play innocent with me. You know exactly what you're doing. You're just trying to make my life harder. Aren't you? You can't stand the thought that there's going to be someone else who matters more than you." Alia's cheeks flushed with a potent mix of anger and hurt. "That's not true, Marina. I'm trying my best." Her voice trembled, but she refused to back down. The air crackled with tension, each word a spark in a volatile situation. Alia could feel her composure slipping, the injustice of it all crashing down around her. She was desperate for her father to see, to intervene, but instead, the weight of Marina's accusations hung over her like a dark cloud, suffocating and relentless. "Maybe it's because you've always been jealous," Marina sneered, her words laced with venom. Jealous of the attention, jealous of this baby. I can't have that kind of negativity around my child. You're just too unstable, Alia. The accusation hit Alia like a punch to the gut, leaving her gasping for breath. Her throat tightened, suffocating under the weight of Marina's words. Before she could respond, her father stormed into the room, drawn by the escalating tension. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice taut as he glanced between Marina's seething anger and Alia's shocked expression. Marina turned to him, her face contorted with distress. "I can't take this anymore, Petro. I can't have her here, not around the baby. It's too much stress, and I can't keep wondering what she'll do next. I need her gone." Petro's face paled, disbelief etching itself across his features. "Marina, are you saying you want her to leave?" "Yes," she spat, her tone cold and unwavering. "I'm putting my foot down. She needs to go. I deserve peace and the assurance that my child will be safe. She doesn't belong here anymore." Alia felt the floor drop out from beneath her, a freefall into despair. She turned to her father, her eyes pleading for some sign of resistance, some flicker of loyalty. But Petro's expression was grim, his hand rubbing the back of his neck in a futile attempt to ease the pressure. "Maybe it's best if you stay with Aunt Sarah for a while," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as if he feared the weight of his own words. "Just until things settle down. You know, Marina's been under a lot of stress." Alia's heart shattered into a million pieces. "But Dad," she cried, her voice trembling, "this is my home too. I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you letting her do this?" Petro looked away, his gaze distant, as if he were already miles away. "Alia, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Marina needs peace, and this is the only way." The world spun around her, a dizzying blur of betrayal and disbelief. She stumbled up to her room, tears streaming down her face as she gathered a few belongings. The thought of leaving her home, the place she once felt safe, was crushing. As she packed, muffled voices drifted from downstairs. She could hear Marina's triumphant tone, cutting through the air like a blade, while Petro's responses were muted, reluctant. Even though she couldn't make out the words, she didn't need to. She knew that Marina had one. Her stepmother's cruel manipulations had succeeded in tearing her family apart. A short time later, Alia was on her way to Aunt Sarah's, her father's reluctant goodbye echoing painfully in her mind. Aunt Sarah lived a few towns over, but the distance felt insurmountable, an abyss separating her from everything she had ever known and loved. Though Alia hadn't spent much time with Aunt Sarah, she remembered her as kind and gentle. When Sarah opened the door and saw Alia's tear-streaked face, she pulled her into a tight embrace, saying nothing but conveying a deep understanding of the pain Alia was enduring. Life at Aunt Sarah's was quiet, but it was an agonizing adjustment. Alia couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, a hollow ache from having been cast out by her own father. Sarah tried her best to lift Alia's spirits, taking her out to parks and introducing her to friends in the neighborhood. But Alia struggled to find joy in anything. The shadows of her old life clung to her like a heavy cloak. Each night, she lay awake, replaying the events that had led to her eviction, tormented by the nagging question of whether there was something she could have done differently to change the outcome. Meanwhile, life continued without her at home. Petro rarely called, and when he did, the conversations were short and uncomfortable, filled with awkward silences that spoke volumes. Alia imagined Marina lurking in the background, smug and satisfied, relishing her triumph in ridding herself of the girl she deemed an inconvenience. Even from a distance, Alia could sense that things were unraveling within her family. The few times Petro called, he sounded weary, his voice strained, and Aunt Sarah noticed it too, mentioning that he seemed worn down, that perhaps he wasn't as happy as he thought he'd be under Marina's demands. Alia didn't know whether to find comfort or sadness in that realization. Part of her longed for her father's remorse, but another part felt hollow at the thought that he might not fight to bring her back. Months passed in a strange limbo, with Alia slowly adapting to life away from her father. Sarah encouraged her to focus on her studies, to think about the future, but Alia's mind kept drifting back to the life she had left behind. her father, her home, the little family they had once been. It all felt like a distant memory, just out of reach. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Alia finally broke the silence that had wrapped around them like a heavy fog. "Do you think Dad regrets it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah looked at her, sadness in her eyes. "I think he does," she replied gently. "But he's a man who's always been willing to bend to keep the peace. Sometimes people like that don't realize the damage they're causing until it's too late." Alia nodded, understanding the words but finding no comfort in them. Weeks turned into months at Aunt Sarah's, and she felt the distance from her father growing. His calls became less frequent, and each time they spoke, he sounded more distant, as if an ever-widening chasm had swallowed their connection whole. Sarah did her best to make Alia feel at home, but an undeniable emptiness gnawed at her heart, a void that nothing could fill. She felt abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect her. Despite everything, Alia found a small flicker of hope deep within her, a stubborn refusal to let go of the love she still felt for her father, even as the pain of betrayal twisted in her chest. Just when Alia felt engulfed by despair, an unexpected light pierced through the darkness in the form of an old friend. Mia was a classmate she hadn't seen much of in recent years, but one fateful afternoon, while visiting a local library, Alia bumped into her. Alia tried to mask her emotions, but Mia's sharp, perceptive gaze saw right through her facade. After a tense, awkward silence, Mia finally asked, "What's going on, Alia? You don't look well. Is something wrong?" Alia hesitated, the weight of her pain heavy on her chest as she battled with the urge to confide in Mia. But loneliness gnawed at her insides like a hungry beast, and before she knew it, everything tumbled out in a rush. How Marina had twisted her father against her, the gut-wrenching accusations, and the brutal day when her father had asked her to leave. "That's awful," Mia said softly, her face a mixture of shock and sadness. "I can't believe your dad would let her treat you like that." Alia nodded, feeling her heart shatter under the strain of her reality. "It's like I don't exist anymore. I don't matter to him now that Marina's in the picture." Mia placed a comforting hand on Alia's shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. "You have to tell someone, Alia. You can't go through this alone." Those words echoed in Alia's mind over the following days, haunting her as she wrestled with her thoughts. Eventually, she decided to reach out to her mother, who lived out of state. Their relationship had been strained since the divorce, but feeling discarded by her father left her with no other option. Taking a deep breath, Alia picked up her phone and dialed her mother's number, her hands shaking violently as she waited for the call to connect. When her mother, Lisa, answered, surprise mixed with warmth colored her voice. "Alia, is everything all right?" The familiar comfort in her mother's tone sent a wave of emotion crashing over Alia, and she fought to keep her composure. "Mom, I need your help," Alia managed to choke out. A heavy pause hung between them before Lisa's tone shifted to one of deep concern. "What's going on? You sound upset." For the next half hour, Alia laid bare her heart, recounting everything from Marina's merciless treatment to her father's betrayal and her forced exile to Aunt Sarah's. Lisa listened in silence, her fury building beneath the surface like a volcano ready to erupt. When Alia finally finished, there was a cold fire in her mother's voice. "I knew Marina wasn't good for your father, but I had no idea it had gotten this bad. Alia, pack your bags. I'm coming to get you." Hearing her mother's words felt like the release of a dam, lifting a crushing weight from Alia's shoulders. For the first time in months, she dared to feel hope ignite in her chest. Lisa wasted no time, making arrangements to come and retrieve her, and 2 days later, she arrived at Aunt Sarah's house. The reunion was bittersweet. Alia was overwhelmed with relief to be with her mother, but the reality of leaving her father behind tore at her heart like a jagged knife. Lisa thanked Aunt Sarah for her unwavering support, and they exchanged knowing glances, both women acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. As they prepared to leave, Sarah wrapped Alia in a tight hug, whispering fiercely, "You're doing the right thing. Don't look back." With those words echoing in her heart, Alia felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. She was ready to reclaim her life, to tear down the walls that had confined her, and to step out of the suffocating shadows of the past and into the blazing light of a new beginning. Once back in her mother's car, Alia was engulfed by a wave of conflicting emotions: sadness, relief, and a lingering hurt from her father's abandonment. Her mother sensed her turmoil and gently squeezed her hand. "You're safe now, sweetheart. We're going to get through this together." As they drove out of town, leaving behind the painful memories, Alia felt the weight of her past begin to lift. Her mother took her to stay with her grandparents, who had always been a stable, supportive presence in her life. Their faces lit up with joy at her arrival, but the happiness quickly faded into shock when they heard what had happened. Her grandfather, a stern yet kind man, was especially appalled. "I never thought your father would abandon you like this," he said, his voice thick with anger. "This isn't the man I knew." Alia's grandmother, her voice soft but firm, added, "We support you, dear. You don't need to go back to that toxic environment. We're here for you." Surrounded by her mother and grandparents, Alia finally felt a sense of security that had eluded her for so long. Yet even in this comfort, the wound from her father's betrayal lingered, an ache that wouldn't fade. As the weeks passed, her grandparents and mother became her pillars, providing the love and support she had been missing. She enrolled in a nearby school, and Mia, who stayed in touch, helped her adjust to the new changes. Alia's new life began to take shape, but the sense of closure she desperately sought remained just out of reach. One evening, after a quiet family dinner, her grandmother pulled her aside, her face etched with determination. "Alia, I think it's time we confront your father. He needs to know the damage he's done, and he should answer for it." Alia felt a knot twist in her stomach at the thought of facing her father, but her grandmother's words resonated deeply. She needed closure, a chance to voice the hurt and betrayal that had festered within her. The next day, her mother, grandparents, and Mia's family rallied around her, ready to support her through the confrontation. They arranged a family meeting, and when Petro arrived, he looked uncertain, his eyes flickering with discomfort as he took in the serious faces around him. Marina was conspicuously absent, but Alia could sense her influence lurking in the shadows. Her grandfather spoke first, his voice steady and unyielding. "Petro, we trusted you to care for Alia. How could you let this happen?" Petro shifted uncomfortably, his expression a mixture of shame and regret. It wasn't that simple. Marina was struggling. The pregnancy was hard on her, and I thought that, by keeping the peace, I was protecting everyone. Lisa's voice cut through the tension, filled with a fierce anger and sadness. "By keeping the peace, you abandoned your daughter. Alia came to you for help, and you pushed her away." Petro opened his mouth to respond, but shame washed over his features, and he looked away. Finding strength in her mother's and grandparents' presence, Alia spoke up, her voice trembling but resolute. "You didn't just push me away, Dad. You made me feel like I didn't matter. You let Marina control everything, and in doing so, you lost me. I needed you, and you chose her." The words hung heavy in the air, a raw confession that sliced through the silence. Alia's heart raced, fueled by the catharsis of finally expressing the pain she had carried for so long. Wavering but resolute, Alia faced her father with a fierce determination. "You told me to leave, Dad. You chose Marina over me, even when you knew what she was doing. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" Petro's face twisted in anguish, his hands clenching tightly at his sides, as if trying to hold back the flood of regret. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad. I thought you were just struggling to adjust." Alia's grandfather stepped forward, his disappointment radiating like an electric charge in the tense room. "You were blinded, Petro, but that doesn't excuse what you did. This family is broken because of your choices, and you need to live with that reality." Petro, visibly shaken, reached out instinctively toward Alia, but she recoiled, her heart too raw and battered to accept his apology. She recognized the sorrow in his eyes, but the damage was irreversible. Her grandparents stood firm, their loyalty unwavering, making it abundantly clear to Petro that they would sever all ties with him if he continued to prioritize Marina over his own daughter. Seeing the relentless resolve in his family, Petro's understanding began to dawn on him. He left that day a shattered man, his relationship with Alia fractured beyond repair. As he walked out the door, a tumult of emotions surged within her, a mix of sorrow and profound relief. She had finally confronted the pain he had inflicted, and now, for the first time, she felt the heavy chains of her past beginning to loosen. Surrounded by her loving family, Alia felt a newfound strength rise within her, a fire igniting in her heart. The road to healing would be long and arduous, but she was finally free from the suffocating grip of Marina and the deep scars of her father's betrayal. With her family's unwavering support, she began to rebuild her life, embracing the truth that she was worthy of love and respect. Yet after the painful confrontation, Alia was left mentally and emotionally drained. Coming to terms with the stark reality that her father had chosen Marina over her was a bitter pill to swallow, and the sting of that truth lingered like an open wound. Despite her mother's comforting presence and her grandparents' steady support, there were long, lonely nights when the isolation felt overwhelming and the betrayal wrapped around her like a cold shroud. Just as she struggled to piece her life back together, an unexpected lifeline arrived. Aunt Sanaa, her mother's fierce and vibrant older sister, reached out, offering to take her in. Sanaa was a whirlwind of energy, known for her unwavering loyalty to family. Though they hadn't spent much time together due to Sanaa's busy life in a nearby city, she had always held a special place in her heart for Alia. Now, witnessing the turmoil that Alia had endured, she insisted that Alia come live with her, promising a fresh start. When Alia stepped into Sanaa's apartment, she was instantly enveloped by a profound sense of peace. The space was bright and airy, alive with the vibrant colors of plants, books, and artwork that radiated calm and positivity. Sanaa greeted her with open arms, her warmth wrapping around Alia like a protective shield. "You're safe here, sweetheart," she said, squeezing Alia's shoulder tightly. "This is your space now, and no one will take that away from you." Under Sanaa's nurturing care, Alia began to heal, the gentle encouragement of her aunt guiding her through the storm. Sanaa understood the weight Alia carried, yet she was also firm, pushing her to talk about her feelings and helping her set new, ambitious goals for her future. With every conversation, Alia learned to value herself, to prioritize her own peace, and to recognize her worth as a person. Slowly but surely, she began to rediscover the fragments of her identity. As the weeks rolled on, Alia came to a powerful realization. She didn't need her father's approval or love to feel complete. She was enveloped by people who genuinely cared for her, and the absence of her father transformed from a raw wound into a scar, a painful reminder of what had been, but no longer a source of suffering. When she thought of Petro, she no longer felt the need to mourn the father she had lost. Instead, she saw him as a man who had failed her, a man too easily manipulated by a woman who had ultimately betrayed him. With this understanding settled in her heart, Alia made the resolute decision not to reach out or attempt to mend their shattered bond. She was ready to embrace her new life, one forged from resilience, love, and a profound sense of self-worth.
Bye bye.